right. Good evening, gentlemen, and welcome to the penultimate episode of the Moby Dick Book Club. That's right. We have made it through about this much book, that much book. We've only got about that much book left. So glad somebody is still here with me this far in. So when we last left before we get any further, if you want to be a part of these discussions, you got to go into the video description and find a link to the Discord server. When we last left the crew of the Pequod, there was a horrible lightning storm and glowing lightning from the different parts of the ship, which we had talked about in great detail. And Ahab pledged himself to the lightning, and then they decided to continue on towards the equator. This chapter 120 is an interaction between Ahab and Starbuck, and not being very nautically minded, I have to just assume from context that Starbuck wanted to do a perfectly sensible thing during the storm, something with the sails to make things safer, and whatever it was that he wanted to do, Ahab just told him to not strike anything, but just to lash it, so to tie things up rather than taking them down. And Starbuck's a little bit taken back by this, but yeah, he goes through with it anyway. So if you've got anything to add to the nautical things, Mark, I'd be happy to hear it because I'm surrounded by land.
Yeah, well, I mean, you're supposed to take all the sails down and get pretty much lash anything down that might act like a sail in a big wind, so your boat doesn't go to and fro randomly. And what he says is lock everything down, as in everything the way it is. And I think if I remember correctly, the sails were torn as well.
Okay.
So, yeah, that's not what you want. Like, you definitely don't want that. And yeah, I mean, there's other reasons, like wet sails are not great. And if you take them down in a storm, they don't get as wet. So yeah, there's a bunch of little, reasons why you basically wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and so this is just this dynamic between Ahab and Starbuck continues on all throughout these chapters here of Starbuck having serious questions about Ahab's decisions and his capacity for governance, but not doing anything about it. So that comes up over and over again. We got three little chapters here, all right in a row. Stubb is. In chapter 121, Stubb and Flask are having a conversation about Ahab, and Stubb appears to just be unworried about Ahab's behavior because he doesn't really care about anything. He's always happy. So, yeah. And he denies having said that the Nantucket insurance company should have put out extra money on anything. Any boat captained by Ahab. So.
Mm-hmm.
I just love the absurdity every time, especially like the conversations between Stubb and Flask are just so good. I mean, the imagery is completely nonsensical, and like filling your pictures at your coat collar, and the image of like, you got the powder barrels aft and boxes of lucifers forward. It's just absolutely ridiculous. And then it's like the logistics of how you'd manage to make that dangerous in the middle of a storm. And everything is just so ridiculous. But there's the whole thing where Stubb is kind of going on this rant to Flask, saying, it's easy to be sensible. Why aren't you sensible? And then he's like Flask goes to him and says, you seem to find it rather hard. And he's like, of course I do, because it's wet out here and all these things. It's just like, it's just, this was a nice little comical chapter.
Yeah, it seems like they're tying the anchors down, which seems like a good enough thing to do so they don't go flying off in a storm. Unless you're supposed to anchor down in a storm, but I don't think so. Probably break something.
I mean, with the boat that large, anchoring down in the storm keeps the boat a little bit more stable on the waves. Wetter, perhaps, but yeah, you don't want your boat flung around. I think that was part of what was happening there was, what do we do with this, right? And I mean, you're supposed to have lightning rods out too, right? So it's not like you're not supposed to have anything in the water.
Yeah, and then chapter 122 is very very short, shortest chapter in the entire book. Tashtigo is the main top sail yard, and he's just asking the thunder to stop. He wants rum instead. So you got kind of this like high, middle, low uh, uh, triad here, where there's the debate in the highest, but Ahab's in charge. In the middle, there's some back and forth about whether or not he's good. The low part's just kind of cold and miserable and just wants creature comforts right there.
Yeah, and I think also, I think the indication is everyone's pretty much going a little crazy because he was like, "What is this? Ho ho hum!" And like, "What? Hum hum hum? What are you doing? Like, this makes no sense." Yeah, and
Yeah,
that's
yeah.
never happened before with him that I can recall. So
He's usually pretty cool.
yeah,
Yeah, so the whole ship's going mad, after Ahab brandished the glowing blood harpoon at them. Um, no wonder, really.
a small wonder indeed.
Seems like, yeah, it seems like a corner's been turned. I don't know. We'll see that maybe it's not quite so turned at this point, though. So yeah, it's just the ship's in a storm and everybody's going mad. That's basically it. I don't think there's a whole lot more to it. Um, Apparently, though, this storm, they were able to pass through fairly quickly, or they were just getting a glanced by it, because by the time we get to chapter 123, um, it seems to have calmed down enough. And Starbuck had been ordered to keep Captain Ahab appraised of the conditions and to let him know if there was any change in the conditions. And so on his way down into the cabin, Starbuck sees the muskets that Ahab has. And he has a long, hard think about those muskets. I believe he even reaches out and grabs one as a part of his long, hard think. And he's getting ready to really think about some things. Like this is the very musket he pointed at me. There's this debate inside of him is like, would it actually be lawful for me to just take the old man out and save 30 lives here? Because his governance right now is clearly way on the line. He also contemplates making him a prisoner, but doesn't seem to do that. And then, yeah, decides not to go through with it and actually sends Stubb in there to go wake him up and appraise him of the situation. So we see that Starbuck, despite all of his vaunted courage against whales, does not seem to have much courage against Ahab.
Yeah, he sort of overthinks it. You know, I mean, he spends, and maybe if you're contemplating, shooting your captain, you should spend a decent amount of time thinking about it. But he's there, like just right outside the guy's bedroom doing that, and it's just the amount of like weighing options of I stand alone here upon an open sea with two oceans and a whole continent between me and law. It's like, yeah, fair enough. Like a lot of other bad stuff has kind of happened so far, and I'm actually, even like the common spoilers aside, I actually don't know how much damage is potentially going to be coming up here pretty soon. So looking back on this, I'm not sure how much he could have avoided by going in for that. And at the same time, it's just like, how do you make that choice? Because clearly this guy has gone full on completely insane and violent at this point, you know and but he's not he doesn't actually stop to make the conscious decision not to do it, except that he gets like startled from Ahab's night terrors. And then he's just like, okay, that's enough. Like, I'm just gonna send Stubb in to handle this. But he's everyone's kind of going stir crazy with the typhoon, and then it's like he's over rationalizing at this point, and then gets knocked out by out of his trance by Ahab's crazy ravings.
Yeah, yeah, that's what we're dealing with here. And part of it too is he kind of quotes some of the. Uh, I think this is an important line right here. Has he not dashed his heavenly quadrant? Right. So that was a few chapters ago. The quadrant being a tool that mariners use to measure the position of the sun at a certain time of day, and thereby rather precisely determine their location on the earth. And the heavenly quadrant, I think that gives us an indication of what's going on there. That Ahab's ability to navigate is now severely compromised. And so we're going to see that a little bit uh, coming up here in the next chapter, the needle. So it's morning, it's dawn, and uh, they're trying to go, what was it, southeast? Uh, Mostly south, anyway, and no, mostly east. I think that was
Mostly,
supposed to be their
yeah.
their heading. And so Ahab comes up and talks to the guy behind the till and says, "Which way are we going?" And the guy's like, points to the compasses and says, "Well, we're going mostly east right now." And he's like, It's dawn, right? So why is the sun at our back? We should be heading towards the sun." And that kind of freaks everybody out. And the crew is very much shocked about the malfunction of their compasses, but the officers seem to be a little less perturbed by it. Um, Starbuck and Ahab both say, "Well, it was the lightning strikes that messed with the orientation of our compasses and um, now have them working completely backwards." And so, they're able to get the ship righted, but that's another problem with their navigation. Until Ahab orders a few different pieces of metal, and uh, he seems to understand the basic principles of magnetism and have a plan for magnetizing the tip of one needle, um, and so makes his own compass needle there and installs that on the till, and it spins around for a bit, but then it gets properly oriented and starts pointing north. And the crew just seems to be pretty amazed by this, except for Starbuck, who cannot look at Ahab while he's doing it.
Hmm.
So we've got a lot of different things about navigating and being able to find your way, and those things being taken away from us. But he is able to fix the compass, though. So that shows a certain kind of mastery over least some of the parts of nature that we can control.
Yeah, it's definitely a bad omen. And yeah, the more experienced seamen know about this lightning phenomena, and know that there is a way to remake a compass needle basically in a pinch if you have the right stuff. But yeah, everybody else is sort of amazed by it. And then so you've got that further bifurcation of those who know and those who don't know, right? And and the enthrallment that happens as a result of just not understanding what's happening, right? And not being aware, not having the experience previously. And so that sense of hierarchy really comes out here. To your earlier point about the upper, the lower, and the middle, right? That hierarchy really comes out in this scene. And yeah, I mean, part of the problem is we've lost some of the components of navigation. So navigation is actually rather complex thing. There's a bunch of different parts. Um, yeah, using the sun, you can only kind of figure out how high up you are on the globe, right? Where you are in terms of latitude there, but you can't actually figure out what your longitude is, with any precision at this point. So that's the problem with that. So
Yeah, there's a lot of really nice imagery in this one because we just went from the very dark, constant windy, stirring seas and everything like that. They're getting knocked around. It even says like a shuttlecock just absolutely just thrown around. And then now it's nice and calm seas. The sea was like a crucible of molten gold, so it's all very bright and visible. And we're already kind of seeing this thing where, Ahab was indoors sleeping during the storm stuff. And then now he's outdoors. Like we're kind of seeing a little bit of inversion of where he was before, where he was obsessively looking at the sun when he had the chance to do it. But then, he was kind of we're seeing a lot of this kind of movement back and forth between him being very concealed and then him now being out. And it seems like the transition is getting faster as well between those two. And he's got this whole thing where he's, thou might as well be taken now for the sea chariot of the sun. And he says, all nations before my prow, I bring the sun to ye, which is essentially what they're doing with the whale oil and everything. But now it's taking on a little bit of a different level. And then he immediately goes and like actually strikes the guy who gives the wrong directions, and then the guy had no idea. But it's interesting that it said, let me see here, that the phenomenon just observed by Ahab had unaccountably escaped everyone else, but its very blinding palpableness must have been the cause. So you have this thing now where it's like Ahab is actually seeing more clearly now that he's not looking up, in a sense. Like he's not actually trying to navigate. So his eyes are forward. He's actually paying attention to his surroundings, and which is kind of an advantage. But then, of course, like he immediately turns it to evil. And like just the whole thing is like him. There's the part where he's making the needle, and they're talking about how he was even making like additional movements, which might have just been to like further enchant the guys. Like he probably didn't have to go through all of that. And but I love this line that Ishmaelville puts here. The magnetic energy as developed in the mariner's needle is, as all know, essentially one with the electricity beheld in heaven. Hence, it is not to be much marveled at that such things should be.
Everybody knows that, yeah. I mean,
course.
it was common knowledge about the electromagnetic spectrum in those things.
Well, and that it's heavenly. Yeah. That's why the compasses point north. There you go.
Now, what do you think of this phenomena of everybody's eyes down at the instruments of navigation and missing, like, oh, the sun should be there, and it's actually back there, right? It's not like we're
Yeah.
off by a few degrees here.
Well,
It's like
that's another snipe at science and measurement. That's all it is. It's a yeah, you can get lost in your tools and miss the fact that there's better information available to you, but for just looking. Like the absolute, just paying attention at all. Right, because you're so stuck to these tools that you think are fantastic that you're never verifying them.
alrighty, and then we've got this really interesting phenomena where while Ahab's making the new needle, the crew is fascinated by it. The harpooneers are kind of stoic about it, and Starbuck can't look at it, right?
Right.
Um, there's something very, I don't know, potent about that. We see kind of, yeah, in Starbuck, kind of like an establishment respectability about him that he's supposed to be embodying, kind of the best of what civilization has to offer. And when he sees Ahab, which is, well, I mean, the very last words of the chapter, in his fiery eyes of scorn and triumph, you saw Ahab in all his fatal pride right there. This
Mm.
proud usurper. He's not able to effectively rise up against that. He doesn't have any kinds of means to counterbalance that. We see that with the musket, and then now that he can't look at Ahab, or not, now that Ahab is with a fair amount of excellence moving closer towards his goal, um, he can't even look on. He's like looking away in shame because he's unable to do anything about what's happening.
Yeah. It's a deeply
Oh, he's a
symbolic.
Quaker too, isn't he? That's a
Yeah.
pacifist branch of Protestantism.
Yep. They were all pacifists.
Because there would be, if you were to read, especially some of the Jesuits of the 16th century, they would provide all the justification that Starbuck would have needed to take Captain Ahab out.
To dispatch
And
with Ahab, yeah.
yeah, but a pacifist sect, that's going to be a much different thing than a uh, uh, quick thinking Spaniard.
Well, and I think that's part of the message is that, this inability to take certain actions leads to destruction. If you're not willing to do the work, bad things are going to happen no matter how good you are in skill or in virtue, we'll say.
Mhm.
It doesn't matter. Like you have to take the right action at the right moment.
Right, right, and that's why for Thomas Aquinas, sponsor of today's video, um, the form of all the virtues, the thing that actually makes virtues virtuous is charity, intending the good first towards God and creatures for the sake of God, right? And so, just if it's not all serving that highest purpose, then none of your virtues are actually able to properly be themselves, even unless it's got that subordination towards the highest purpose, whatever that happens to be in the situation that you find yourself.
Hmm.
Mhm.
It seems like there's also the sort of reassertion to the sort of more ignorant sailors that he's kind of putting himself back in that place because he terrified everybody with his stunt with the flaming harpoon and everything like that. And then now, you have, so this is something that I didn't notice. Well, I noticed that the needles were exactly inverted. Like they weren't
Mm.
just off. They were completely off. Like exactly off. But I didn't notice the line where he says, "My men, the thunder turned old Ahab's needles. But out of this bit of steel, Ahab can make one of his own that will point as true as any." So, and he's surrounded by gold and light the entire time, and then making these magical moves and stuff. So he's in a sense like, and these guys are now, instead of being terrified and literally running away from him like they were just a couple days before, now they're completely fascinated. And then he goes and he says, look ye for yourselves if Ahab be not lord of the level lodestone. And this is, and he invites them to look at the compass and says, one after another they peered in, for nothing but their own eyes could persuade such ignorance as theirs, and one after another they slunk away. So it's like he's gotten them back without violence. Like he lost them with violence, and now he's done this great, to their mindset, even though it's basically like a third grade science project.
It's a third grade science project that you don't necessarily have a kit providing you with everything you need to run it.
I'm not saying I could do it right now, but I'm just saying that, like,
but not for
they're
them
mystified.
back then.
Right, like they're mystified by it because they haven't seen it.
But this is unknown back then.
Yeah.
To all but the elite.
Yeah.
And we're still on the cusp of, we're on the other side of the cusp of private societies and guilds and secrets and all that. Like this is when that all starts to fall away historically, right? Before this, there were guilds and they held their secrets, and you would have no access, like actually zero, to how to forge something, right? The secrets of magnetism, right? Anything chemical at all, right? Like all this stuff. Well, it was, quote, known. It was not known to everybody. This is another aspect of the Enlightenment, which is why you need to say the Dark Ages, right? Because one of the distinctions between the Dark Ages and the Enlightenment is now suddenly everybody has access to all of the, quote, forbidden knowledge. And that actually is part of what creates the problem of the Enlightenment, right? That nobody ever talks about, by the way, except apparently me now. But it's actually really important to understand that, because when you disenchant the world by even telling people, no, this knowledge exists and is transportable, which is a complete lie, by the way, then the world changes, because they can't see hierarchy as well anymore, because everybody has access to everything, so no one's special. But that, having access to the knowledge in particular doesn't help you, right? It helps the special people, but it doesn't help everybody else. But you don't know that, because we're living in what I call the age of gnosis, where knowledge as propositions is the highest value, and the fact that you can't use that knowledge, or you actually don't understand that knowledge well enough to wield it or something, doesn't occur to anybody, right? Which is far more important, right? It does you no good to read a book on programming in a particular programming language if you don't understand the core concepts of programming, as it turns out. It just won't help you.
I'm thinking, so there's something that's kind of coming to mind. So he's the only guy seemingly that actually is aware of this. I would assume that the carpenter would know how to do this.
No.
Then, yeah, there's something about, like, he has that privileged information, and he has enchanted himself as well. Because, like, when he found out about this, like, I'm willing to bet that it wasn't like this really, majestic experience or something. Like, someone probably showed him how to do this like many years before or something like that. But he does this thing that he already knew how to do, and he has fiery eyes of scorn and triumph from it. So, like, he's completely enchanted himself as well just by doing this.
Yeah, that's a good point. The enchantment is, and you kind of have to, right? Like, if you're not enchanted by your own magic, was it yours? Right? Like you kind of have to be able to do that to some extent, especially if you're going to maintain an image, which in this case, of course, he's very much trying to maintain a particular image.
Yeah.
Well, it's a good thing people don't get enchanted by their own magic now. That'd be really bad.
Yeah.
That'd be super awkward, man. Super awkward.
Like, imagine if you were to create, like, I don't know, like a really cool large language model. and then tell everybody that it's going to bring humanity to enlightenment.
Or
That'd be
or
really bad.
interpret the Bible.
Or interpret the Bible. That'd be the worst, man.
Or understand mythos as such, or it's a little closer to everybody. I think you could come up with something like the monomyth, like Joseph Campbell did.
Monomyth.
It's such unbelievable trash. It's still hard for me to imagine.
Is that like a monocycle?
It's Campbell's idea, that all the religions are the same and all myths are the same and they're all pointing at exactly the same thing. And it's like,
Okay, so that's just regular old perennialism with a little scientific flavoring on it, huh?
yeah, well, and he's all psychology this, and it's
Yeah.
one of the most viewed PBS specials is the Bill Moyer's interview with Joseph Campbell, and I'm just like, Joseph Campbell's wrong about everything. Why would anybody watch? He's obviously dumb. Like, I
Because
don't know.
George Lucas read Joseph Campbell and then made Star Wars.
No, it's worse. Joseph Campbell was a consultant on Star Wars. And this is the funny part. Like, go read the transcript of his interpretation of what happens in Star Wars, and you're like, bro, did you see the movie? He consulted on it. I'm like, you missed a bunch of stuff, bro. Like, you don't understand any of this, and it's partly your movie. And one of his comments is on an ad lib, not something that was written in. Right. And of course, I know this. Campbell must know this. And yet he's commenting as though he understands the symbolic interpretation of it. And I'm like, you are such a charlatan. It's such an unbelievable charlatan. You should have been locked up for that immediately. It's such a scam. Such a scam.
Well, you do benefit from freedom of speech, Mark. You do benefit from it, and unfortunately,
that doesn't mean you shouldn't be jailed for your speech. It just means you're allowed to make the speech.
Can I show something ridiculous really quick? So I definitely have like the Ishmael edition because they didn't even bother to format the chapters, and it's like this for the next like 3 chapters.
Nice.
So you thought chapter 124 was just going to be really long?
Yeah, so when I was first looking at the readings, I was like, "Oh my goodness, this chapter is ridiculous." And then I looked at it, and it's just, oh, and the numbers jump too. This guy is insane. And then I saw it in the middle of the thing.
Well, we can move on to chapter 125. And when Ahab broke the quadrant, um, he made a vow that he was just going to be using dead reckoning from now on. And while I don't fully understand how it works, as far as I can tell, you basically just carefully measure your speed and your bearing at regular intervals. And that allows you to get a pretty good estimation of where you would be. Obviously, when an island is there or where an island is not there, you might have to adjust those things. And I have to imagine that the quadrant was considered an advance upon Dead Reckoning because of its ability to tell you where you are right now with a higher degree of accuracy. But Ahab went and smashed that, so he needs to go back to using Dead Reckoning. And so they literally, today I learned to measure speed, you literally had a log that would spin and you would count the number of knots on it at a certain time period, and that told you how fast you were going. And then you would use that to calculate things in your log book. So I didn't get the chance to look this up, but like, does the word log, as in a log book, come from a log that's spinning with a rope around it?
Well, the log doesn't. It's not a log. B, it doesn't spin.
Well, they call it a log, though.
Yeah, I know, but it sits in the water. It's triangular, I think.
Okay.
It sits in the water, not moving. And then as the ship moves, you count the knots as they go through.
Okay.
And you time that, right? For whatever time period it is. I actually don't remember. I have it's not It's not here, but I have a navigational techniques book somewhere. Um, but I did look this up to refresh my memory. So yeah, it's a triangle, and so you've got a piece of twine that comes down, it gets cut into three, and it orients the triangle so it doesn't move in the water, basically, right? You want
It's
it
got a bunch of drag on it.
right. You want to minimize the drag so that it doesn't go anywhere. Um, and then what happens is um, you count those knots as they go by. That tells you how fast you're going. And with dead reckoning, what that means is that you're reckoning based on your position. So it's my last position versus this position. And contrary to what you may believe, you actually have to use dead reckoning when you're sailing, or when you're on a boat at all, of any kind. Right? And this comes into play as when you're near shore, all the measurements in the world to the sun or the stars is not a good idea. It's like because you have to pay attention to the water around you and the shoals and right. And so what ends up happening is you dead reckon your way into your coves and your bays and things like that. You have to. You don't have time to stop and do these silly calculations. Um, and you don't even have time to figure out your speed. Like you dead reckon your speed based on how quick you're moving in the relation to other objects. That's still a type of dead reckoning. And there's lots of ways to do dead reckoning. And a typical sailor, they have a bunch of tools, and they use most of them, if not all of them, right? They have astrolabes for sailing at night and stuff like that. And that those line up with the stars and tell you all kinds of things about where you are on the earth, for example. So and there's all sorts of tools, and dead reckoning is a tool, and most of them get used on every voyage. So it's not like, oh no, they're dead reckoning now. It's well, that's actually not at all invalid, especially
The
when you're searching for whales or something, right? That's moving in the water. Like you don't want to be precise. You don't really know where you're going.
everybody's looking at this. It literally says that most of the ships of this time had not been using dead reckoning while they're out on the open sea, and the wooden reel and angular log attached hung long untouched just beneath the railing of the after bulwarks here. So
Right.
whatever method that Ishmaelville is describing here, it seems like they keep the dead reckoning around as a backup rather than
Yeah.
using it regularly while they're out on the open ocean.
Yeah. You don't care how fast you're going generally. You're going towards or away from the whales, like and then that's it. And yeah, I mean, when you have better tools, and out on the open ocean, you have better tools. You've got charts, right? Uh, and then because this is always the argument. People say like the Chinese couldn't have sailed to California, and the Vikings couldn't have sailed to North America, even though we absolutely know the Vikings sailed to North America, right? Because they only had dead reckoning, and I'm like, you're a moron. You, you know, you've obviously never been in a boat. It's like I don't know what to tell you. Oh yes, you can. It's really easy, actually. It may not be the best idea in the world, but it's certainly quite doable.
Mhm.
People do it all the time now because it turns out that all the modern equipment in the world can go wrong and does. It happens like once a year to one of these boats going across one of the big oceans, actually, and they have to have these other techniques that are older, and almost nobody has an astrolabe anymore. And I should have several, but fortunately they were stolen from me. So they have other things they can use. And compasses are not anywhere near as reliable as people think. And usually
Well,
on a
because the
boat,
North Pole keeps moving, right?
usually on a boat you carry several. They can get stuck. They can get
Mhm.
demagnetized in a storm, as we've seen, right? All kinds of weird things can happen with compasses. And if you use compasses enough, you'll notice, right? And that's definitely a phenomena that actually happens. People don't account for it because you just ignore all the errors and say compasses are great. And it's like, well, compasses are great when they work. but they don't always work like everything else. People do this with GPS. GPSs are great. They're fantastic when they work, and when they send you to the wrong address, they're not great. When they send you off a bridge, the last week, somebody died. They went right off an unfinished bridge. Not great. Not great. I don't know what to tell you. So
Well,
yeah,
there was some operator error in there. I have to imagine there were somebody put up in front of the bridge.
Waze versus maps, and
Yeah.
what because we used Waze to get to Sarah's cousin's house, and it sent us 8 miles away. And then when I pinged them about it, they said, "Oh, there's 2 addresses in Google system." And I was like, "Well, I don't even know how you have 2 addresses for the same place, especially when maps send you to the right one, and that's the database you're using, but that database has 2 entries, and apparently their way into those entries is somehow different from the way Google." And I was just like, "Oh my," I mean, I can see the bug. I can see the bug. I'm just like, "How did you make this mistake? Why isn't your data normal?" Right. I know all this stuff. I'm like, "I could fix this for you. Pay me lots of money." But no one listens. No one listens. But the technology is not reliable. And technology, as in a compass, is also not reliable.
I just wanted to say I definitely appreciate captains Kentucky windaging their way around the ocean, and I can also say that everything Mark said about the log is actually incorrect. As a professor of log lines at the at Nature's Granite Founded College, I have a course on this, of course, and the the speed log is absolutely named after a log father. Eric, you were correct.
Oh, it might be named after a log, but actually, if you look up log lines, well, and they said it angular, right in the text. It's an angular piece of wood.
Okay, but yeah, I don't actually know anything about this.
No, yeah, if you actually look up Wikipedia, even they have a nice picture of one. That's why they said angular, because it is angled. I think they mentioned it too. Didn't they mention the 3 lines?
Yeah, I think they did.
Yeah, so the string goes down, and then there's 3 lines that connect the 3 points of the wooden triangle, and then the knots are at regular intervals, and that's how you measure speed. That's why they measure nautical speed in knots. Two different not spellings, by the way. It's very confusing. And knots are not quite miles per hour, right? So how fast are we going? I don't know, right? And sailors always talk in knots, and it's just very confusing.
Yep, and so when they throw the log in there, it breaks because it's just been sitting there and it hasn't been doing anything. So Ahab says, the carpenter, he can make another one, and he'll take care of it." And then Pip comes out, and Pip is still claiming that he died and that his soul is elsewhere, and yeah, all of a sudden Ahab takes a liking to old Pip there. Um, so he decides that he's going to be his best friend in the cabin now, and it's like, oh great, the madmen have found each other. I was hoping this would happen.
Yeah, I like the the Manxman, who is basically the pillar of reason at this point, according to Ishmael, is scolding the little Pip, and then Ahab goes and says, "The greater idiot ever scolds the lesser. Hands off from that holiness. Where sayest thou Pip was, boy?" And then he says, "I see not my reflection in the vacant pupils of thy eyes." Oh my goodness.
Yeah, well, and Manxman, I think he's the one that warns Ahab about the tenuousness of the rope, that they're, and he's like, I don't know about this thing. It looks like it's gonna snap. And Ahab's like, no, it'll be fine. It'll be fine, right? And it's like, dude, what are you doing? You're like, you're not listening to the wisest man on the ship. That's probably a bad plan.
Well, that's a great line right there, though. I see not my reflection in the vacant pupil of thy eyes, right? So it's like that Ahab has such a spell over the rest of the crew that he looks at them and all he sees is Ahab. But Pip is so crazy, he's not even tracking with these things now. And so finally Ahab has somebody else to talk to, that isn't just the mirror image of his bad ideas, I guess.
I mean, just Ahab's ramblings at the Manxman just before that, where he goes and like the guy says, "Oh, he's from the Isle of Man." And he says, "In the Isle of Man, eh? Well, the other way it's good. Here's a man from man, a man born and once independent man, and now unmanned of man."
Yeah, and I think Pip is just like outside of the enchantment bubble with Ahab. And that's why they're best friends all of a sudden.
All righty. So we get on to chapter 126, the life buoy. They're now headed in the right direction towards the equator. And they getting towards the equatorial fishing ground, which is apparently a great place to find whales. And they hear a strange cry. The Manxman says that's the cry of drowned men. But Ahab and Starbuck, or at least Ahab, maybe not Starbuck, says that was probably seals. And some animals can sound an awful lot like human beings when they're crying out. Certain goats are almost indistinguishable, and so those are pretty funny videos on YouTube. Just listening to goats scream, because it sounds really human, but also not somehow. It's really close. But that doesn't convince people that the sounds of these cries in the night are going to be bad things. And indeed, bad things begins to happen. One of the men, perhaps in a hazy dream state, but we're not really sure, ends up falling off of the mast. And apparently you can fall off the mast and hit the water.
Oh yeah.
I'm not sure how that happens, but I'll just gonna.
It's way more likely than hitting the deck.
Is it because the ship's moving underneath you, or is it
You're
because
high
of the
enough
costing-
up that if you fall straight down on a mast, you're probably not going to hit the deck unless you're on calm seas. Because the mast is really high up and you're on the water. Well, that's the pivot point. So a little tilt this way puts you way out over the water very easily.
Okay. I thought it was, but I've never, and probably will never be, up on top of the mast of a sailing ship.
Well, you don't even have to be on top of the mast, actually. So, like if you sail on a catamaran, for example, a relatively small one, a lot of times they'll do what's called flying the boat. And a catamaran is a 2 pontoon boat. They're very stable. They draw almost no water. They're fantastic. Everything else is not a boat, as far as I can tell. Catamarans are the best. The problem is they're wider than most boats, so that creates all kinds of potential problems. But the small ones, 17, 15-foot ones, what they do is they put them up on one pontoon on purpose, which increases the speed tremendously once you get it out of the water. Also takes quite a bit of skill not to tip the boat over, because you've just done away with the thing that makes the boat not tip over. But the minute you do that, like if you fall, like if anything happens, you fall into the water. There's no sides on these boats. You just kind of go into the water. But what a lot of people do is there's a trapeze that's attached to the top of the mast. And they'll go out over the trapeze. So they're out, the boat's like this, they're out over the water, maybe only 3 feet over the water, and you're going like this, and they're just having fun because they're out over the water. And so that's, that's one thing you can do. My aunt used to do that actually, on the catamaran when I was growing up. My uncle had a catamaran, so that was fun. It's called flying, so you can fly out over the water while the boat's moving. But it actually doesn't take much. Like, you're not that far off, right? If the boat comes down, then you would fall on the boat again, right? Or so it really doesn't take much, and you kind of don't realize that. And also the boat's moving, so the odds that when you fall off, that you don't have some momentum in one direction or another are pretty slim already. And so the odds that you'll hit the boat, you'd have to be out this way, and the momentum would have to be the other way, right, for you to exactly hit the boat. And the boats are relatively narrow, so side to side, it's real easy. Front to back, it's a little bit different, but the boat's more stable in that direction. So, yeah, you're most likely going to get flung off the side into the water.
Okay. And our sailor does, and apparently the other sailors didn't note this at the time, but he was one of the first ones to go up the mast and look for Moby Dick. That was mentioned explicitly in the text here, and they throw out the life buoy, but not only is he already like too far gone for the life buoy, maybe he died on impact with the water, or maybe they were already too far past him. But the life buoy also sinks because it again had not been attended to properly and had not been kept in good repair. And they well, looks like we got more work for the carpenter to do, and the Queequeg offers his coffin to be used as a life buoy. Apparently, it's the appropriate dimensions for such a task, and well, he's not using it right now, so they can go ahead and do that. And the carpenter's very unhappy about it because he likes a nice mathematical task that has a beginning, a middle, and an end. And this seems like the project that's never ending because it was first a coffin and now it needs to be waterproofed and rigged up so that it can be a life buoy.
Yeah, he's also upset at the fact that he's changing the nature of the thing he already created, which is another hint. And also he talks about the Aroostook hemlock. So that's a county in Maine. I've been there, and that's a particular type of I don't even know if it's a tree or a bush actually, but that particular type of wood is apparently special. I actually don't know much about that, but I've heard of it before, just in passing. Um, and so there's all these local references throughout the book. It's very interesting if you know at least some of them. I seem to know a bunch of them. And yeah, that's southern Maine too, Aroostook County. And
So I think he's just saying that he's really tough and hard to work with. Nazi Aroostook hemlock, the naughtiness. Yeah.
right, well, and it is this, as the book is full of, right? It is this analogy back to nature, from man to nature, and the book's full of that, of course. But it's interesting that it's wood, right? Because it hasn't been before, and the reason why they're using Queequeg's coffin is because he doesn't have the right kind of wood on board. So the closest thing they have is the coffin. Like, he went to find the right wood, and then it just turns out they don't have any of the varieties of wood that would work for this. I think they're looking at the kegs and going, "Wait, we don't have a keg of this type of wood available." Whether they're all full of whale oil or whatnot, it doesn't seem clear to me why.
Yeah.
Something I thought was really, I mean, I I found it interesting just kind of watching the superstitions of the sailors. So you have certain things that they're picking up and other things that they're not. So they're enchanted by a certain number of things. They're dealing with the fact that they're hearing the strange wailing of some sort of creature out on the seas. And once again Ahab shows up and is not he wakes up and they report it to him. And he of course has the insider knowledge again, and it doesn't help. So like the last time everyone was very enchanted by it, and people are actually they are more enchanted by it again, but it's also like the negative side of that. So he says, "Oh yeah, it's actually seals, and this is why it's the seals and everything." So but there's only the more affected some of them because most mariners cherish a very superstitious feeling about seals, and it's like, well, there you go. Like the factual information about it didn't help at all. It just made it worse. And there's the thing, under certain circumstances seals have been more than once been mistaken for men. And yeah, like I could see, especially in the dark, that, or just for like a moment, the face would be very similar. um but yeah, there's a lot of that sort of, they're worried and they're on the lookout for something, but they're so on the lookout that they don't notice the larger picture, which you pointed out already, that this was the first guy to go looking for the whale. They completely missed that. And then and they even immediately see it as like, oh, that's the fulfillment of the omen that we got. And the Manxman says no, but then like no one really pays attention to that, it seems like. And I did just like the image that he has here for that the ironbound cask that they had as the little life vessel. It says it sank down to the bottom as if to yield him his pillow, though in sooth but a hard one. It's just like it's pretty rough. Um,
Yeah, yeah. His explanation for the seals is interesting, and seals look exactly like people in the water. Like you cannot tell the difference at all. You have to really know what you're looking for. Right? You have to know, like, oh no, there are no people here. Um, I saw a bunch in right off the shore in Cape Cod actually this summer, which was kind of cool because I hadn't been there before. It was Lighthouse Beach, or the one right down from Lighthouse Beach, which is apparently one of the best beaches in the world. Although I didn't care for it much, but there were seals like 50 feet offshore, like they were real close. And I see a ton in Maine at the beach there. But the excuse is, oh, there's shoals nearby, and there are mother seals who have birthed and lost calves, and that's the reason for the whaling. And it's like, it doesn't sound any better. Like this is not good. And of course, you know, I'm sure people are aware of the siren song and all that, right? And mermaids, and this is all tied up with that set of superstitions, which is an interesting set of superstitions at the end of the day.
I like the just the ridiculous image of Odysseus tied up and going nuts over just the sound of seals. Oh, I just wanted to mention a couple of the lines there when the carpenter is making the coffin into the cask. So he goes and he says, I make a leg for Captain Ahab and he wears it like a gentleman, but I make a bandbox for Queequeg and he won't put his head into it. Are all my pains to go for nothing with that coffin? And I'm ordered to make a life buoy of it. It's undignified. It's like, yeah. But then where he goes, because all they have is the one cast, that he has all of these lines that he's setting. So he's got like 30 lines so that if something were to happen, all the guys could grab a rope. And I think Ahab calls him like a silkworm or something like that because of it.
Mm.
And but he says, if the whole goes down, there will be 30 lively fellows all fighting for one coffin, a sight not seen very often beneath the sun.
Yeah, yeah. And then he spends all this time comparing carpentry with cobbing. So carpentry, I guess you're always building something new, but cobbers are always fixing something old. and he doesn't like
Right.
that at all. And if he had liked that, he would have become a copper anyway. Um, Alrighty, chapter 127. We've got the uh, carpenter doing his work on the coffin, and yeah, Ahab confronts him. They have a very strange conversation, as Ahab is now, it's kind of his specialty, I suppose. Uh, some great lines in there, actually. And then the a little bit of a conversation with Pip too, or is that? I think that's in a later chapter. But Pip is still following Ahab around. So anyway, some great lines here. Uh, the carpenter says, "Faith, sir." I faith. What's that? Why, faith, sir. It's only sort of an exclamation like, "That's all, sir." We might have had a real moment there to open Ahab up to something
Yeah.
bigger than himself, but the carpenter doesn't know that the faith is the act of the intellect assenting to divinely revealed truths by the command of the will, as moved by God's grace. So, unfortunately, he's not able to help there. And then another great line from Ahab here: "A life buoy of a coffin. Does it go further? Can it be that in some spiritual sense the coffin is, after all, but an immortality preserver?"
And then I'll think of that, but no. And then he just moves on. Yeah, no, it's absolutely full of these. I mean, I like he goes and he asks the carpenter, and he says, "The gravedigger in the play sings, spade in hand, dost thou ever?" And the carpenter says, "The reason why the gravedigger made music must have been because there was none in his spade, sir, but the caulking mallet is full of it. Hark to it." And then he's just there banging away at this thing, and Ahab's like, "Blind and dumb might well be envied now." And then he says, "How immaterial are all materials? What things real are there but imponderable thoughts?" Which sounds like something Ishmael would say.
Oh, yeah.
But yeah, and then this last line here, now then, Pip, we'll talk this over. I do suck most wondrous philosophies from thee. Some unknown conduits from the unknown worlds must empty into thee. Like oh my goodness. He's getting his enlightenment from the kid that's crazier than he is.
You can see it happen,
Yeah.
Dan. You can see it happen. Just go find the right corner of the YouTube.
And there's examples
Blind
that come to
leading the
mind I don't
blind,
want to
man.
say.
Yeah. Well, we don't need to get into. We've got enough Moby Dick to talk about. Chapter 128. The Pequod meets the Rachel here. Um, so anyway, here we have another Gam with the Rachel, and the captain of the Rachel comes over to the Pequod. He's imploring Ahab to help him go after a lost whaling boat that they had sent down after Moby Dick. And Stubb is remarking about how unusual it is to, I guess sometimes you just lose a whaling vessel, right? Um, which is just like, ouch, that's a really bad death right there, to be in a little cork boat out on the open ocean all by yourself. And yeah, it's like, would you please just take 48 hours and help me conduct a search? And we find out it was his son that was on that whaling boat there. Um, Ahab is, of course, obsessed with killing Moby Dick, and he will not budge. He's happy to know that Moby Dick's in the area, and that's all there is to it. And yeah, really interesting line right here. So when he's telling the captain of the Rachel that he's not going to do it, God bless me, man, and may I forgive myself, but I must go. Now I'm willing to believe that there's some utility and help in forgiving yourself for mistakes that you've created, mistakes that you've committed. But that's not the first step right there, right? The first step should be God forgive me, and then maybe we can get onto some of this, self acceptance stuff right there. So I was about blown away by it. It's like, yep, that's the only compass that Ahab has is he's only references himself, like when he was looking at the doubloon, and it's like, the sun, that's Ahab, and the mountains, that's also Ahab. So we're seeing more of that absolute self-referentiality in there with the Rachel. Now, Mark, all of the gams that we've had have had symbolic names. Do you understand the symbolism of this one?
What do you mean symbolic names? You mean the ships?
Yeah, the ships.
Well, this is the first normal ship name we've had. I mean, everybody knows all ships are female, right?
Fair enough. I'm about to shortly launch into a thing on this as well.
Yeah.
Well, launch into it, Castle. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm just needling you. Launch into it, Castle.
Well, no. So a lot of the ships have like biblical people's names, and also, I mean, you've got all these different guys like Eli, the street prophet that we had in the beginning of the book, and all these things. Like, there's a lot.
There are biblical references in this book. Yes.
Yeah, I
really?
mean, we're finding out now at chapter 128, but but there's an interesting thing that's happened. I don't know if it's necessarily 3 chapters in a row, but it was definitely 3 times within these past 4 chapters, I think. That there's originally, and it's interesting that this all happens actually just this week that we had these readings, because the initial thing when the seals and the crying came up is these are lost, according to Ahab, these are lost child seals.
Yep.
And then you have the lost child on the Rachel. And Ishmaelville explicitly references Herod's killing of the children under the age of 2 and refers to them as the innocents, which we just had the Feast of the Holy Innocents on Saturday. And
you could have been a part of that, Mark. You could have been a part of that. Just saying.
I've been feasting since Christmas.
Well, then, well done.
Thank you.
Then you did it. But no, we had that going on. I was like, oh, that's really interesting, because I read this, I think, like a day or two before we had that feast, and it was on my radar. And then so you have that whole aspect, and then you have there was another one, some other thing that was brought up here, and then now you have this where the very last line was she was Rachel weeping for her children because they were not, and that's the line in the Bible right after Herod goes and makes the order for all of the children under the age of 2 to get killed.
It's a callback. It's a quoting the book of the prophet Jeremiah.
Yeah, exactly. So there's like layers upon layers going on there. Meanwhile, there's the lost kid on the ship called Rachel, and so yeah, there's a lot going on there, but
it's 2 kids. The interesting thing about this is that, like, what first happens is protocol's immediately broken, right? Because the captain of the Rachel is like halfway to the Pequod before Ahab can even decide if he wants to gam. I mean, the pattern so far has been, I ain't going to your boat. Just tell me about the damn whale, and let's get. Have you seen a white whale or not? If you have, I'll gam. Otherwise, I got things to do, right? And then this is completely broken, and he's like, well, what's going on? So this guy's hurrying to the boat, and then he's appealing to Ahab, and there's this whole discussion about, well, I wonder what it is, right? Like he's going to ask Ahab for something. Clearly something's gone wrong. We already know that because protocol's been broken. He's hurried, right? the reason why he's talking about this missing whaling boat is because his watch is on it or his favorite coat, right?
That's all
And
Stubb knows. It was Stubb who said that.
right, right. And then it turns out that it's his son, but he's hiding the fact that there's also a 12-year-old boy missing on that same boat, and the father's on the boat and he's distraught. And he eventually admits it. And so nobody here is getting away um scot free. They're all sinning in their own way, right? And that's part of the problem with this whole thing. And so you have the children of the female seals, you have the guy on the boat who is basically a child of Ahab, right, going into the water, and then you've got these two children that are now missing, right? And he won't, even for money, take this 48 hours out to do this elaborate search. And he's given an excuse, right? And the excuse is there ain't no way, given that they had to go in the opposite direction and pick up all the other people first, that this ship is still around. Like the boat's not around. Because you got to remember, if it were that far out, the Pequod would have already seen it. Right? So it's not, the boat's gone. Like the boat's definitely gone. Nobody believes the boat isn't gone. And Ahab's kind of like, well, I mean, I should, out of politeness or whatever, search for it, right? Sailor's code, however you want to think about it, then that's a thing. But nah, whale time. Let's do this. And so nobody gets off scot-free. Everyone's guilty. And it's a futile mission anyway. Which is just emblematic, I suspect, although I haven't finished the book yet, that the mission Ahab decides to go on instead is also a futile mission. I'm just glad there's no foreshadowing in this book to ruin everything, like the guy falling off the boat, and that would be awkward.
All right. Chapter 129. Ahab and Pip go below deck and um, have another very strange conversation. The only thing I have to say about this is this line right here near the beginning. There is that indeed, poor lad, which I feel too curing to my malady, like cures like, and for this hunt, my malady becomes my most desired health. Right there. So it's like, well, the more monomaniac I am, the more likely I am to get the daggone whale. So yes, let's go mad together.
And he tells poor Pip, that sit here in my own screwed chair, another screw to it thou must be. It's like, yeah. But then he immediately flips around and like the kid really wants him to stick around, and he's like, "Weep so and I'll murder thee. Have a care for Ahab too is mad." It's like, yeah, that was pretty much inevitable just within like a couple of paragraphs, I guess.
Oh, gosh. Very short little chapter here. But we get to chapter 130, and Ahab is now full time on deck. He does not go below deck anymore. Oftentimes, he's got a hat over his eyes, so the men can't tell if he's dozing out there on the deck or if he's watching them, and so that freaks them out. And Fadala is in there too, and he's also just behaving in a very strange and an unnatural manner. And then Ahab does something which I just imagine captains don't do. He went up into the mast and begin watching out for the whale himself. Now, maybe captains do that, and people could let me know if I'm incorrect about that. But that
Nope.
seems like something you leave to somebody else.
No, captain's too important to do that work.
Yeah. And then when he gets right up there, a strange bird begins attacking Ahab, and he doesn't seem to care about it. It carries off his hat, and then there's a reference to Tarkin and some Roman mythology, which I wish we had Adam here to explain to us. But apparently, the hat was replaced in this Roman mythology, and Ahab's hat is lost with a bird. So anyway, it's a good thing there isn't any foreshadowing in this book, because otherwise that
Exactly.
would be that would be awfully. We're just putting, it's like, oh yeah, we're gonna put 12 layers of foreshadowing on this baby. And if people don't know that this book's gonna end tragically by the end of it, I'll burn myself alive.
I'm just so I like this kind of we've gone from the sleeping Ahab in the middle of the storm, and then the hyper competent like Ahab the sorcerer in the golden light and everything like that, and then now we're back to dark, and he's says that that like machines they dumbly moved about the deck, ever conscious that the old man's despot eye was on them. So now there's like complete subjection that the crew has under Ahab. And Fedallah, who's usually like the guy that's staring at Ahab and seems very kind of ominous, now is like shivering and seems like he himself is also under Ahab's gaze and no longer has any sort of like sway over him necessarily, not in any sort of like authoritative way. And then yeah, that he's just there like a psychopath, just standing there. He doesn't go back into his bedroom to sleep or anything like that. And I think he does this for like days on end. So he's just standing there. And like if he's able to, he's either unbelievably sleep deprived and wet, or but it says that he's wet all night and then the sunshine dries upon him. So it's like just days are just passing and he's just standing in the same spot and everyone's just
You
seeing
guys,
the statue staring
you
at
thought
them.
it was bad when he threw his pipe into the ocean, right? It's
Yeah,
like,
it's just so much worse.
oh man.
Yeah, and then he and Fedallah the Parsi are just staring at each other. It says that it says fixedly gazing upon each other as if in the Parsi Ahab saw his forthrown shadow, in Ahab the Parsi his abandoned substance. The an unseen tyrant driving them. It's like, yeah, there's just everything about this has just gotten. It went from okay, this is bad, like the guy is a tyrant and everything like that, to something is seriously wrong with this guy, and he knew it was going to happen. He literally tells the kid, "Go, I need to be like this," and then he just does it to a degree that you. And there's no amount of foreshadowing that can really let you know that he's about to behave like this. And then he goes and says, he goes even more nuts and he says, Ahab must have the doubloon. Like, that's the thing that he says before he gets hauled up. And then he does. I almost wonder at this point if he knows that Starbuck was in his cabin. Uh, I mean, that might be a little too extra, but if he knew that Starbuck was considering killing him and that
For what?
before. Well, back when he was in the cabin
So
and
yeah,
Starbuck had the
extra
thing.
what?
Um, that when he gets hoisted up, that he tells Starbuck to watch the rope. So there is a certain amount of like extra power influence being put on him
Oh,
of like
extra power. Okay.
yeah, that it's like, well, like yeah, you thought about killing me, but now you have the perfect opportunity to do it, and you know it works because some guy already fell. And it's just like,
Right.
but anyway, you're in charge of the rope.
Well, I think Starbucks just too honorable to do it that way.
Yeah.
Like trying to make it look like an accident. That's not the honorable man's way out.
Oh.
Honorable man just takes care of it.
Yeah, but it'd be easy. You just because it says something like if the rope isn't constantly watched, just anyone could just wind up grabbing it because there's so much rope. You just look distracted for like 5 minutes, and then just someone else will do it for you. But of course, Ahab knows he won't.
Alrighty, and chapter 131, the Pequod meets the Delight. The intense Pequod sailed on, and they meet another ship, the Delight, and the ship they meet is really beat up. Seems like they've lost 5 sailors in a fight with the whale, and gosh, I read it this afternoon. It seems like um, it attacked the main boat as well, rather than just a little whaling ship. And the captain of the Delight is like, the harpoon is not yet forged that will ever kill Moby Dick. And yeah, and Ahab's not having any of it, but uh, they try and sail off before they can hear the splash of the body of the sailor hitting the water, but they can't quite get out there yet. So anyway, let's just put another layer of foreshadowing on the. Oh man, yeah. This is here's a deep cut for you. This is like when you're just got past the Midgar Zolom in Final Fantasy VII, and you see that Sephiroth has killed one. Um, a deep cut for you Final Fantasy VII fans out there. The Midgar Zolom could wipe your party at that time, and it's like, oh, Sephiroth killed one of them. That's really scary, all by himself. We couldn't take him down with 3. Anyway, it's just foreshadowing here.
I don't understand the reference, but I respect the lore commitment.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Because 5 guys are lost. 4 of them apparently just go down, and their bodies are irretrievable. But one of them, the body's retrievable, and it's being put in the water in a casket, and the splash from that hits the rail of the stern of the ship. Basically, is what it's referring to, and that's I mean, these are superstitious sailors, so that's not a good sign to the sailors now. And so one way to look at this is like the layers of foreshadowing. This is like foreshadowing to the sailors. And then you can see that cycles played out twice, I think, in this set of chapters. Is you got the high foreshadowing, the really abstract stuff, and then the lower foreshadowing, right? And then now this is just like the base level foreshadowing, all the way down to the superstition of the people on the boat, including Ahab, apparently, right? And he takes the opportunity too to defy the idea that a harpoon has not yet been forged by showing off his harpoon and like giving off its bona fides. I think this was quenched in blood.
Yeah, there's I mean, and so you have this. Ishmael even calls it a ghostly baptism. So you have this sort of like reverse baptism aspect to it. Just like you get splashed by some dead guy hitting the water next to you. And it's like that is,
I wouldn't want to have that happen to me.
Right. Fair enough.
I would prefer to avoid that.
I'm not saying, don't
I think sailors are right here.
Yeah, no, fair enough. And yeah, and then the other guys on the other ship that just dropped the body are then, calling the Pequod, hypocrites. In vain, O you strangers, ye fly our sad burial, you but turned us your taffrail to show us your coffin. So yeah. Now, was that whatever container they tossed that dude into the water? Is that? I guess we'll have to go back and like reanalyze. But I wonder if that is one of the first hearses that was talked about, or if there's another one coming up.
There's another one coming.
Okay.
Sorry, spoilers. Spoilers.
Oh, no.
Coming.
There's so many layers of foreshadowing. I don't know what's the actual thing or not.
That's fair. That's fair.
The same thing happened to me then that these guys did when they were like, oh, it must be, the fulfillment of all of our superstitions must have been that guy falling off of the masthead. And they're like, oh, that was it. And then you're like, the next one's like,
only
no,
hemp can kill me. Looks like that just means hanging and only hanging.
Yeah.
A common enough thing to fall into.
Limited perspective. It's always a problem. You don't know what you don't know,
No.
But I'll tell you what's not a problem is us having nothing more to read. And I do think we'll be able to finish this in the next session. So once again, very enlightening conversation here. And anybody who wants to perhaps join in can come down to the Discord server. Links in the description below. But otherwise, if you get a whole bunch of foreshadowing all at once, gentlemen, please just listen to it. You got all the opportunities you need. Good night and God bless.